Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Kesubos, Daf Kuf Vav and Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph. We'll be stopping about 8 to 10 lines before the end of the page. My apologies about last night. I did a circumcision yesterday morning for a non-Jewish family, and they called me at like 7:45 last night to tell me that the baby was bleeding a little bit. It wasn't an emergency, but it was worth it for me to go there. So while I was in the car, I called a bunch of Rabbanim Chashuvim, including our very own Rabbi Robinson, to ask if I'm able to sneak away in this religious Christian home for a few minutes. Can I give the Daf Yomi shiur from their home? So I spoke to Rabbi First. I called Rabbi Robinson. He didn't answer. Then I called Rabbi First. Of course, Rabbi First always answers the phone. He's like, of course you can, no problem. Rabbi Robinson added a little bit of nuance. He said, first of all, you have to make sure that there's no pesel in the room, that you're no Yoshka statues. You got to make sure you're not... he was a yid anyways, but the statue is a problem. And then Rabbi Robinson added again, will they be in the room while you teach? It's usher to teach Talmud Torah to a goy. I said, but Rabbi Robinson, we don't understand what we're reading. For sure, they don't understand what they're reading. There's no chance. So last night's blot was all about shochad and bribery. I'll use the word shochad more than bribery. Then he'll have no clue. That one change will be enough. So he was matir. So that was where last night's shiur was recorded in Burr Ridge, Illinois, in the home of, it was very far.
Beautiful stuff.
Yeah. All right. That's why, and I didn't want to put that in the text message last night. I have to go to a religious. It's all recorded, but I got to give the context. Okay, Rabosai, let's jump in. We're 10 lines down or so on Kuf Vav Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Bishnei de Rav Yosef. In the years of Rav Yosef was a 3rd century Amora, so figure around the year 375, somewhere around there, 350. Have a rischa. There was a rischa, there was an anger. And Rashi points out that this was basically a famine. And the Gemara says, Amrle Rabbanan the Rav Yosef, the rabbis at the time, the Talmidim said to Rav Yosef, Liboy mar rachame, please go daven for the tzibur. We need a little bit of help. This is very hard times. Amar lehu, and he says back a difficult response. Hashta, Uma Elisha, just like Elisha the Navi, Havu Rabbanan Miftre Mikame, when he would finish teaching, Havu Faishu Trey Alfe Masan Rabbanan, there were Trey Alfen, Alfen is 2,000 plus 200. There were 2,200 students, and they were all being fed by him. And Be'idan Rischa, even in times of famine, Lo Hababai Rachame. Elisha didn't consider that moment to be a time to daven. Strange. Again, we have to figure out why. Look in the Rishonim. Ana yiboy rachme. I am no Elisha, so that of course I'm not going to daven. If he didn't daven, I'm not going to daven. Says the Gemara that we answered the first part of the question, but what's with the numbers? The 2,200. Says the Gemara. When we buy defy shehachi, how do we know that there were 2,200? The pasuk says, "Vayomer Mishar so the servant of Elisha said, Ma." I'm going to give out food to 100 people. And says the Gemara, my lifnei mea ish. What do you mean 100 people? Ilema dekulu lifnei mea ish. If the total number of students that he had was 100, then when the pasuk at the bottom of yesterday's blot gives the details of how much food there was, that food is b'shnei b'tzoras tuvahabu. That's way too much food. And if you look at the pasuk on the bottom of the previous page, it's on the first of the very long lines. It's lechem bikurim esrim. There's 20 loaves of bread. Lechem seorim. Leisha lukim lechem bikurim esrim. Lechem seorim v'karmel b'tziklono. It was a lot of food, basically. So Rashi said, the Gemara says that it can't be that there were a total of 100 students. That can't be pshat in the pasuk. Ella the kol chad v'chad kame me'ish. Each of the units that are found in here, and there are 22 units. There's 20 pieces of bread, and there's one of the lechem seorim, and there's one karmel b'tziklono, that's 22 units. Each of those would feed 100 people. 22 times 100 people is 2,200. That's how many talmidim he had. Says the Gemara, similar story. Ki have a miftrei rabbanan mibei Rav. When the talmidim would leave Rav's presence, Rav, the great Amora, the earliest of the Amoraim, really he was in the Dor HaMa'avar, as we've spoken about many times. He straddled the two worlds of Tanaim and Amoraim. How many talmidim did he have? Faishe alfa umasan rabbanan, 1,200 students. That's big. That's big. Maybe Rav Huna, and then in the times of Rav Huna, Abu Faishe Tamne Mea Rabbanon. Tamne is 800. Tamne is 8 and Mea is 100. He had 800 students. Rav Huna Habadarish Betzlei Saramorai. Rav Huna, how many students did he have? He had 800 students. And says the Gemara, he would use 13 voice boxes. He would have 13 Amoraim speaking on his behalf in order to belt out. Maybe he didn't have a large voice. I don't know. That's what the Gemara says. And when everyone, all 800 Bachrim who were sitting in the yeshiva of Rav Huna, when they would stand up and they would brush off their coats, just from sitting, because they didn't have shiur like we do for 30 minutes. They sat for hours on end. Some of the dust had actually settled on them. So says the Gemara, have a salik avka, the dust that was on their clothes would kind of billow upwards, and it would cover up the daytime. In other words, it made it a little bit dark. There was so much dust. We're indoors now. We're not familiar with this kind of dust. And when we see this kind of dust, we probably complain. That was their whole world every day. And in fact, there was a catchphrase in Eretz Yisrael about this. When it was very sandy and it was very dusty, then people would say, oh, this is just like Rav Huna's shiur in Bavel. A little bit of a modern day, whatever it is, that catchphrase that they would use to reference it.
How many people in shiur?
This was 800. Rav Huna had 800 Talmidim. I mean, the numbers are hard to believe. It's like hard to imagine. And then now we'll see even a greater Yeridas Hadoros, because in the next piece of the Gemara, and we're halfway down on Kuf Vav Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, Ki miftrei Rabbanan mibei Rabba v'Rav Yosef. When the rabbis left the Beis Medrash of Rabba and Rav Yosef, Habu Faishe Arba Mea Rabbanan, there were only 400 Nebuch, only 400 boys enrolled in a top yeshiva, and they were disparaging about their own realities. V'karlan Afshahu Yasme. They referred to themselves as Yisomim, as it related to the numbers of the previous door, that there were so many more people in the early generations of the Amoraim. When people would leave Abaye's Beis Medrash, although some people say it's not his Beis Medrash, one of these three Amoraim, there were only 200, and they referred to themselves, we were already seeing a sharp Yeridas Hadoros at the very beginning times of the Amoraim. This was one of the calculated risks of Rebbe, to write everything down. One of the unique bonds between a parent and a child is the Masorah. And before the Masorah was written down, a father's sole duty in life was to make sure that his kid knew halacha from him. It was not, we send our kids to school. There were no books. The Mishnayos were only written down in the year 200. Before that, and for 1,000 years before that, for 1,500 years before that, we have a Jewish history. There were no Mishnayos. There were no Gemaras like we know them. It was all Baal Peh. And think about the type of bonding you'd have to have parent to child, and the burden on the father to know the material cold to teach it to his kid. Different world. Second, you write it down. Okay, you'll read it in the book later. We'll learn it tomorrow. And then the father doesn't have to remember as much anymore. All the shiurim started getting smaller and smaller. So, I'll be okay. I'll read it a little bit later. And in fact, when the Beis Yosef wrote his commentary on the Tur, the Beis Yosef's commentary on the Tur is a synopsis of all of the Rishonim on a particular issue. And he got hit with a frying pan over the head for what he did. People said that you're going to make it too easy for people to learn. Too easy. We look at that as too hard. But that's the easiest form of learning in our history, that everything is laid out kirachel bitchaktana on a piece of paper. So that's a big, this is one of the Mari Makomos that people talk about with Yeridas Hadoros, that once we wrote down the Mishnayos, everything took a southern turn, and look where we are now. Now we're all Amaratzim. We barely know what's going on. We can't tell up from down. And that's, it's not a point of blame. It's just a historical truth. You have to watch what happened from that point onwards. Things have just kind of nosedived. And now we have an uptick in volume of learning, but the quality is not the same. The quality is not the same. 2/3 of the way down, Kuv Vav Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Redifa, Amar Rav Ami. For anyone who's in finances or banking or anything like that, this page is for you. But it's not complicated. Mevakre Mumin Sheb Yerushalayim, the people whose job it was to check animals for Mumin. We know we just finished Slichos a couple of months ago, a month ago, not even a month ago. And there we know minimum 4 days. So we had the same thing by Korbanos. The Gemara says these people whose job it was to find Mumin, where were they paid from? Which bank account? We learned about the Trumas Salishka in Maseches Shkalim. It was the Pushka, where all the money was put in from the Machzis HaShekel. Where did they get paid from? They too. They were able to get their paychecks from that particular bank account. Amar Rav Gidol, Amar Rav, Talmidei Chachamim Hamalamdin Hilchos Kmitza LeKohanim. The Kmitza, grab flour, take off the thumb, open the pinky, and that was the amount of flour that was used for the Kmitza. Nodlan Schar Mitrumas Halishka. They too got paid from there. Amar Rabbi Babrachan, Amar Rav Yochanan, Magi Esram Shebirushalayim. The people who were sofrim, who would fix up svarim and scrolls. So far, so good. And now we're going to see a little bit of a descending opinion here. Amar Rabbi Nachman, Amar Rav, Nashim ha'orgos beparochos, the women who were doing the embroidery for all of the parochos throughout the Beis Hamikdash. So she's a number one, and this is in the name of Rav. It's Rav Nachman in the name of Rav. What did Rav say? Rav said, "Not los tzchara mitrumas halishka," same bank account as everything else. Va'ani omer, the ani here is Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman quoted Rav. Rav says X. Va'ani omer, I who quoted Rav Nachman. Now I'm going to tell you my opinion. Rav Nachman says, "Va'ani omer mikache bedek habayis." No, it comes from the general slush fund in the bank in the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Holu parochos tachas binyan asuyas, because they're really part of the building. All of the things that we listed previously, the people who were the bodkin and the people who were teaching shechita and all those people were like subcontractors in our parlance, right? And they were doing things for the actual functioning of the base, not the building of the Beis Hamikdash, but the functioning of the Beis Hamikdash. They got paid from the Trumas Halishka. That's what it was for. But once you start talking about parts of the Beis Hamikdash, the conversation shifts a little bit. The parochos, okay, is that lishka like day-to-day function, or is that bedek habayis? Like, no, that's structural. That's like part of the building. Like we make distinctions in learning between Meshubadim and Metaltalin, like the building, the physical building itself, is it parochas part of the building or is it a Metaltalin? Kind of, that's a way to look at it. So, no, they have sanctity to them. The problem isn't sanctity. They different levels of sanctity. Like the lishka, you're buying korbanos with them, so that's a whole different ballgame. But that's for sure. It seems to be that there's a greater level of. We'll see a little bit of a remez of this later today. So let's come back to that. But here we're asking the question of if the paroches is part of the building. Would we say it's like the walls? Would we say it's like, and therefore bedek habayis? And we'll make this chakir in the Gemara in a minute. Or would we say no, it's like the korbanos, it's just part of the day-to-day function. So Rav was of the opinion that a Trumas Halishka is day-to-day function, and Rav Nachman says no, that's not right. Va'ani omer mi kache bedek habayis hula paroches tachas binyan asuyas. They're part of the building. The Gemara asks, hold on one second. Meisvein nashim orgos beparoches. Okay, so that's part one of the brisa. And ubeis garmu al ma'isa lechem apanim, the family who had the actual recipe, the challah recipe. Everyone's in search of a challah recipe. So this one, the Gemara says, we know the family from Beis Garma. We saw their name also. I think it was in Shkalim. I think that was where we saw it. Yeah, Beis Garma was in Shkalim. Yuma. All right, that's
each family had its own.
Right. Well, yeah, and the one that's more familiar to us is Ubei Savtinas al Ma'asak Torres. They actually had the appropriate ratios of the spices. Where did these people get paid from? So it says the Gemara, and what was the first thing in that list? The first thing in that list was arugos beparochos. So how can it be that Rav Nachman was of the opinion that it was taken from bedek habayis? I read this brisa says black on white that that's not true, that it was taken from the lishka. And the Gemara responds, Hassam, in that case where Rav Nachman was saying that it's part of the building, that was bidibave, from the word bava, like bava kama, a doorway or an entranceway. And what the Gemara is saying, no, those parochos were in doorways. They were not regular parochos like this. They had a functionality that was different to them. It wasn't just design or decor. It was specifically meant to create a separation from room to room. How do we know? First long line, 5 lines from the bottom, Kuvav Amar Aleph, says the Gemara Dam Reb Zera Marab, Shlosha Asar parochos hayu b'mikdash sheni. There were 13 parochos in the Beis Hamikdash and Bayis Sheni. Shiva keneged Shiva she'arim, 7 gates in the frame of the building. Achas lepischo shel heichal, 1 into the entranceway of the heichal. Ve'achas lepischo shel ulam. We know the heichal was the middle room. The ulam was the antechamber before that. Beis bidvir and beis kenegdan be'aliyah. The beis bidvir, this was something we learned about in a previous Masechta as well, that in the times of Bayis Rishon, the separation between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodashim were 2 walls. One protruded from the southern wall and one protruded from the northern wall, and the Kohen could walk in between the walls. But in Bayis Sheni, what created that walkway was parochos. So that's what the Bryce is referring to over here, Beis B'Dvir. And then remember that it was a very tall building. So they had other parochos in the upper space because that whole up-down space had a tremendous amount of kedusha. You couldn't just walk in. You couldn't even peer in. So if someone was on the second floor of the Beis Hamikdash, we had to have a parochos to block it off. Haraya, that we are able to see that there are different times that we would look at a paroches and say that we should be paying that from the lishka, and there's sometimes it's from bedek habayis, depends on its functionality. Says the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom at the 2 dots. The Gemara says, Tana Rabbanim Nashim Hamagadlos B'nein Lepara. By the Para Aduma, there were some very specific tasks that needed to take place, but the Para Aduma could never be exposed to anyone who was tummy. So there were specific families who were Moser Nefesh for Klal Yisrael, for the Para Aduma. They would raise their kids on this farm with extremely strict rules to make sure that the kids were always tahor. Huh? I don't even remember it, and I taught him. What that what?
No, the kids, they raise them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember. That part, oh, that rings a bell. The rest of it doesn't. I think I should do some chazara, but I'll do it in about 6 years when it's time to do round 2, because I don't remember. And the Gemara says, so these that were the para, how you know what? Shh. I'm going to edit my for the first time. I'm going to edit. Abishal Omer, no, they didn't collect this money for these families, these special families that were dedicated to the cloud. No, they were not funded by the Lishka. Rather, Omer Nashim Yikaros Yibushalayim Hayazanos Osan Mefarnas Osan. These women, they had like a sisters club, a sisterhood, and the wealthy women would support these families and say, "Wow, you guys are incredible, and we're just going to fund you for what you're doing." So machlokes. Let's see what the Gemara says about this. Bottom line, Ba'mine Rav Huna me Rav. Turning to the top of Kuvav and Beis, and this will get us into a little bit of a lengthy discussion all the way to the bottom of this page. But what about the Kli Sharis? What about the vessels and the utensils? Again, let's go back to our Chakira. When we're going to be paying something that's day-to-day operations, that comes from the Lishka. If it's part of the building, so then it comes from the Bedek HaBayis. What about the Kli Sharis? And the Gemara says, Mahu sheyasu mikache Bedek HaBayis. Should we do it from the Bedek HaBayis or not? Do we say, and here's the Chakira in the Gemara's terms, not mine, because I made mine up. This one's real. The Gemara says, do we say, Tzorech Mizbeach Ninhu, that the Kli Shares are really needed for the Korbanos, Umikache Bedek HaBayis Asu? That makes sense. It's servicing the actual Mizbeach, and the Mizbeach is tethered to the ground. Odilma, or it doesn't say Odilma, sorry. Or do we say, Tzorech Korban Ninhu, Umitrumas Halishka, Hayosanosam? So this is where the Gemara is really drawing its line. We have a line item, by line item budget. Every line says something. We got the Kli Shares, we've got the subcontractors who are the Magiyei Sfarim, and we have the people who are teaching Kmitza and the Kohanim teaching Shechita. We have everything. That was what filled the Trumas Halishka. There were 3 big pushkas. They got filled up. That's what the Gemara says in Shkalim. The Mishnah is there. So here the Gemara says, how do we answer this question? Our broad chakira of when we have something that's part of the building itself, it's Bedek HaBayis. When we have operational things for Korbanos, then it's part of the Lishka. Which one is it? How do we view the Kli Sharis? I could have argued either way. We all could argue either way. So what's the answer? Omar Le, the response of Rav was, Ein nasin el mitrumas halishka. Okay. So what does that mean that he holds? It means that he holds that these things are more korban related than they are building related. That's the chakira, because if you're saying lishka is korban related. So let's question that. The Kli Sharis, yeah. It says on the top line Kli Sharis, and then it asks on the second line Tzorech, and then the next line, is it Tzorech Mizbeach or Tzorech Korban? That's the chakira to remember. Tzorech Mizbeach or Tzorech Korban. It's not so much that it's Tzorech Korban, but if it's not essential to the building, then it's by definition not Bedek HaBayis. And that's why the Gemara had to make this distinction of whether or not the parochos were in a place where doors would normally be, because then their functionality is not just decorative, it's actually part of the building. It's not, you hang, some people hang carpets on their walls as decoration. That's not carpet, that's artwork, right? So I'm just using this as a bad example, but you get the point, is that if you're using a carpet as artwork, that's not part of the building. That's lishka. But if you have it in a doorway space, that's real. That's the real deal. And that should be treated like a door, and a door is Bedek HaBayis. Right, I'm making up my answer, but it makes sense from the flow of the Gemara. I didn't see that in the Rishonim. The Gemara is now going to ask on this sheet of Rav. Again, Rav is of the opinion that Kli Sharis are treated like part of the world of Korban, and therefore it's paid out of the Lishka. The Gemara says, Eisve, let me just read this inside. Where is it? Ukichalosam heviu lifnei hamelach v'hoyada es she'ar hakesef v'yaseu kelim lebeis Hashem. So the Gemara says, Kli Sharis. And the Gemara says over here, let's look at the language here. When they finished, Teviu lifnei melech Yehoyada, as she'ar hakesef, there was extra monies, and from there they made the kli shares. So we see from over here, it's made from extra monies and not from the Trumas Halishka. Trumas Halishka wasn't extra monies. Trumas Halishka was the gold, that was the honeypot. That's what we use to pay the day-to-day things. So what does she'ar mean? Amarle, says the Gemara, a great line. If only we learned Tanakh, we could use this as a jab, but we don't learn Tanakh well enough. So the Gemara says, "De akaryach ksuve." It's very nice that you could read Chumash, but lo akaryach neviye. But you haven't learned Tanakh. But you can only say that if you've learned Tanakh. When I was in Eretz Yisrael in Smicha with one of the Rabbeim who was in the Beis Medrash, they're not part of the kollel I was in. Rabbi Avishai David is a Rav in Ramat Beit Shemesh. Every night he learned 20 prakim of Tanakh. Every night, 20 prakim for years. He knows every word, every chapter and verse, everything. And I was in Eretz Yisrael in August, and I was in his shul, and he gave a drasha. And every time, and I knew this about him because I was in the call. Every time he quoted a pasuk, he'd open the Chumash. And I'm like, Rebbe, what are you doing? Like, everybody knows it's a game. So he's like, my Rabbeim said you should read Psukim out of Chumash, So, okay, so he could use this line. This is a great line. It's great that you've learned Chumash, but how can you not know about Navi? What did it say in the Navi? The Navi says, 8 lines down, Ach lo yaseh beis Hashem, suppose, ki le'oseh ha'malacha yisnehu, that it can be used for oseh malacha. So says the Gemara, if that's true, Yachi kashu kra adade. We have one pasuk that says that the kli shares was from extras, and the other pasuk says that it's not from the extras. Lo kasha, kan shegavu v'hosiru, kan shegavu v'lo hosiru. It just depends whether or not there was extras in regards to the lishka money. Says the Gemara, what does that mean? Who cares if there's extras? It doesn't mean you can use it for kli shares. The pasuk says share. You're not supposed to use it for kli shares. The Gemara responds, quarter of the way down, Le bezdin masne ale. The bezdin always has intent when they collect money in the lishka by the trumas lishka to say as follows: Im hutzrachu. If there's extra money and we need it, we'll use it. Im lav, if not, if that money isn't going to be used, then we're going to use it for kli shares. That's how they would condition it. They made this mental condition that they would use extra money of the lishka if there was extra money. I don't know how that worked the first time. I don't know how that worked out. Okay. Third of the way down. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, Kli Sharis by Mitrumas Alishka. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel was of the opinion that the Kli Sharis was made from the Lishka. Shnemar as She'ar HaKesef. Eizu Kesef She'esh Lo Shirayim. What type of money is it that has extras? Haviyomer is a Trumas Alishka. Why is that true? Why is it that the Trumas Alishka always had money? Because there were enough Jews paying the Machzis HaShekel that they knew the math equation worked out. They had surplus. That's what they planned on. They planned on using the surplus of the Trumas Alishka to build the Kli Sharis. Maybe we should say that you're not allowed to take anything from the Trumas Alishka itself, but only from the Shirayim, meaning you have to budget first. Fiscal year 2023, I know we need $1,200,000, and now I see that there's $1,200. I can take that extra 1,000. Maybe I can only build a Kli Sharis out of extras, but not from the principle of the Lishka itself. Says the Gemara, not correct. Kedama Rava, elsewhere Rava has this drasha ha'olah, ola rishona, that when it says ha'olah, it includes that first animal. And we're not going to discuss that, but this we are going to discuss. Hachanami, the pasuk says hakesef. That's the pasuk we had 5 lines ago as she'ar hakesef. Hakesef is kesef rishon, including even the principal dollars. So the Gemara concludes here within the world of Tana de Rabbi Shmuel that the Kli Sharis can be built out of both the principal and out of the surplus of Trumas Alishka dollars. The Gemara asks almost halfway down, Meisvei, Haktors v'chol korbanos hatzibur b'ay mitrumas alishka, the Torres, the spices, and all of the public korbanos. We know this already. This is ABCs in Maseches Shkalim and in other places that those korbanos were paid for from Trumas Alishka. What else does it say? Mizbech hazahav ulevona uchli shares. Let's pay attention now because kli shares is our case. Where does that get paid from? Nothing that we've discussed before. Bain mimosar nesachim. From extras, from libations, machlokes, and the Rashi here. Just to look at the first few lines of Rashi here, a third of the way down. Dibra maschal mosar nesachim. It's a mapliki ba b'maseches menachos. There's a machlokes between Amoraim. What exactly the nesachim are? The point is that it's not the lishka, which is a problem with the previous shita that we learned. So let's look back. What? It's the mosar from nesachim. It's the mosar from. Oh, you're saying why?
No, it doesn't. Kisharis could come from multiple sources.
Right.
You know, just because it says Kisharis on the south, and this is one of the purposes.
Right. Right. It's also unique because we have not seen this bank account yet. We haven't seen, this is the first we're hearing about this collection of money. And why would it be any different than, it is different than the Trumas Halishka. It is different because that money was direct gift from Klal Yisrael, you know, and this is indirect. And with that, they bought Nesachim, and then the extras of the Nesachim, it is more removed. And if we view, again, I'm making this up, but if we view the Kli Shares as they are, which is kalim that need to be there Mida Oraisa, and they have halachic statuses to them that they have to be kosher and not puzzle. So it could be that there's a need for them to come from the right bank account also, that the monies that build the Kli Shares have to come from the right pot. And if that right pot is the Trumas Halishka, then that's the right pot. It may, again, there may be a kedusha. You hinted to this already before. There may be a kedusha element here. Again, I don't usually look far off the page, but if it were to be the case that someone said something somewhat close to that, that would kind of make sense. Like the reason why we're chiseling about where, you know, where the line item bank account A, bank account, it has to be tied to the lumdus of the Trumas Halishka. It has to be tied. So in this brisa, we've already seen our question about Kli Shares, but we're not done with the brisa yet. Mizbach ha'ola halishkos v'ha'azaros. The Mizbach ha'ola and the lishkos, in this case, the chambers that were all over the place throughout the Beis Hamikdash, v'ha'azaros, in the different areas of the Ezras Yisrael, the Ezras Nashim, Ezras Yisrael, and Ezras Levim, all of those are boin mikache bedek habayis. What about chutz l'chomas v'ha'azara? What about, and here we can give a practical example of a historical place that was built, probably based on this line with the exact dollars. What about things that were outside the Chomas HaZara? So not the footprint of the Beis Hamikdash itself, but the outer wall, the Kosel HaMaravi. Who paid for that? Which line item was that? Seemingly from the Gemara, Boyin Mishiyare Halishkos. It came from surplus in any particular year after the Trumas Halishka was used for all of its core functions. They took those extra dollars and then they would build, let's say, the retaining wall or whatever it is, or Migdal David. I don't know when Migdal David was built, but in theory, those kinds of things would have been built by these extra dollars. And the Brisa continues, and here we see very explicitly the Chomas Ha'ir, the walls of the city. I don't know if this means the walls around the old city. I wouldn't be surprised if it did mean that, because that's where the Beis Hamikdash was, but it could be. Umigdalo Seha, the towers, what is that a reference to? Is that like the Migdal David? Again, we may not even have these buildings anymore. And this isn't talking about buildings. This is all the gemachs and all the, all the support for the community. So what we saw very clearly from here is that it's not so simple that the Kli Shares get paid from the Trumas Halishka, because here we saw that it gets paid from the Mosar Nesachim. So which one is it? Which one is it? And the Gemara concludes a little bit more than halfway down, almost 2/3 of the way down. Really, Tanoihi. There's just a big fat machlokas Tanoim about where the funding came from for the Kli Shares. The Gemara says that it's not in the Mishnah writes. This Mishnah can be found in Maseches Shkalim. Mosar Truma, if there was extra money from Truma, in this case, the Truma that's being referred to as Trumas Halishka. We're talking about the Machzis HaShekel money. Mosar Truma, Mahayu Osinba. So according to the Tanakama, what did they do with Mosar Truma? Rikue Zahav Tzipui Lebeis Koche HaKodashim. They would make hammered gold as wall hangings for the Kodesh HaKodashim. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Mosar Peros Leketz HaMizbeach. The extras would go to Mosar Peros, which is fruits, Leketz HaMizbeach. Well, we already learned about this. Ketz HaMizbeach is making sure that the Beis Hamikdash was never empty. So on a slow day, once all the chiyuv requirements were burnt, and all the nadavim were all burnt, but they didn't want the Beis, it's not right to have the Beis Hamikdash running empty. So they would take another animal, and that would be paid for. That's what the Ketz HaMizbeach is. Rabbi Shmuel Amar Mosar Peros Leketz HaMizbeach. Mosar Truma Lekli Shares. If there anything from extra payros, so that would go to the Ketz HaMizbeach, and Mosar Truma, that would go to Kli Shares. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Mosar Truma Leketz HaMizbeach, Mosar Nesachim Lekli Shares. That's the sheet that we just saw in the Gemara in the New Brisa. Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim Omer, Mosar Nesachim Leketz HaMizbeach, and the extra wine libations, any surplus there would go to the Ketz HaMizbeach, and Mosar Truma Lekli Shares. The point of this, every shita needs analysis, but the point here is that we see that the kli shares is subject to a machlokas tanaim as to what bank account it comes from to pay for it. The Brisa concludes, "V'zeh v'zeh lo hayu modin b'peiros." No one could get on the same page about peiros. Now let's analyze here. Peiros mahi. What peiros are we talking about? Because we weren't talking about peiros before. So what does this have to do with anything? 3/4 of the way down to Tanya, because the Brisa writes, "Mosar truma mahayu osidba." What did they do with the extra money in regards to the truma salishka? So we had said in a Brisa lochen peiros bizol, they would buy fruits on the cheap. Umocher nosam biyoker v'haschar makitzin bosam mizbech. So you buy, that's how they would fund the extra animals on the Mizbech. They get someone who's really good at selling stuff. Oh, I know a guy, I'm going to buy it straight from the truck. I'm going to take out the middleman. He buys a truck of apples at 80 cents on the dollar and sells them for $1.20 on the dollar. Everybody made 50% income. That's great. What did they do with that money, says the Gemara? That was for Kate Samizbech. That's what they would use to keep the animals constantly on the base of Mikdash. What did it mean when it said Vizoish? Oh, and Vizoish Sheshanin, most are pairs like Kate Samizbech. That's what it meant. And my zev is lo hayumodim beperos. What does it mean that they didn't agree about the peros? Says the Gemara Ditzman. Mosar shiur lishka mayu osin bahen. The Mishnah writes, what did they do with the extra money from the truma salishka lochen bahen yeno shmanim v'siltos v'haschar lehektish? They would buy yenos. They'd buy wines and shmanim, oils and siltos. They'd plan for the future. And any extra monies, all of that would be v'haschar lehektish. Anything would go back to hektish. Says Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva fundamentally disagreed. He said you can't be left with no money. You always have to have a nest egg. Why? Rabbi Akiva Omer ein mistakrin b'shel hektish. We don't use hektish money to make money. We don't like, oh, we have $20,000 left. Let's put it in penny stocks. We don't do that. That money has to be liquid. We don't do it from hektish and we don't do it tvanim. And the Gemara analyzes each case. B'shel hektish my time alone. Why can't you use the extra cash in hektish to invest? Says the Gemara, it's very simple. Because ein aniyus b'makom ashirus. We can't have no liquid cash in the Beis Hamikdash. We have to be flush with cash. You don't have to be a billionaire, but there has to be money. This is a makom ashirus. You go in Regal. When you go. Used to be not this way in the airport. When you go to the airport now, it's pajama party. Everybody's rolled out of bed in their pajamas. But you're gonna walk in like a mensch. Everything is be'ashirus. Your nicer clothes. Everything was refined. What about B'Shel Anim? My time alone. Why did Rabbi Akiva say that when it came to a poor person that he was not able? We weren't able to invest in poor people here because because then the bank account's empty. And when somebody comes for help, they're going to come to the Kohen Gadol, whoever they know, and say, Rebbe Shlita, please help me. He'll be like, we're out. We invested our money in the future. Save the pot. Say you have to. This is the chacham of all the big companies. How do you allocate your funds? How do you allocate them in a way that keeps you liquid enough, but keeps you secure enough? That's what the guy. They're having a tiff about how to arrange the finances of the Beis Hamikdash. All right, one more Amud. We're going to stop basically at the wide lines. The Gemara says, Misha halach la Medina Sayam. We spoke about a case where a woman's husband went to Medina Sayam, and Itmar Rav Amar top of Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph. There's a machlokas about a woman's mizonos, which we've spoken about extensively, and we're just going to dig in one more time. The Gemara says, Rav was of the opinion, poskin mizonos le'eshes ish. I just want to say outright, this eshes ish is not the prohibited version of eshes ish. It just means to a woman who's married. We stole the term and made it bad. The phrase eshes ish means a woman. Yeah, we use it in the negative, cheating kind of ways. That's not what this is. This is just how the term should be used. Those words that were taken over by society. So here, this actually is the primary understanding. So Rav was of the opinion that if the husband was out of town, Bezdin, Rashi says on the top line, Bezdin would go into the properties of the guy who traveled, who poskin mizonos. Oh, he's got a monet on the wall and you're hungry, sell it. Give the woman some food. That was Rav. Shmuel argued. Shmuel Amar, Ein poskin mizonos la'ishasish. No way. She doesn't get any food. We'll learn why Shmuel was strong about this, and it kind of makes a lot of sense. And then Shmuel qualifies. Amar Shmuel. Yes, Rav and I do argue. However, not everywhere. Modali Abba, as we've seen throughout Shas, is a term of endearment and respect between Shmuel and Rav, and it's Rav's nickname. Abba, Rav would agree with me, says Shmuel, b'shlosha chodashim harishonim. Rav would for sure agree with me in the first 3 months that we're not poskin mizonos. The bezdin cannot go into the property of the poor person. Why not? What kind of a jerk are you? You leave town, you don't leave any food for your family. And nobody does that. That's not normal. That's not normal. You go shopping at Jewel and you spend a lot of money and you stick it in the cabinets. That's ridiculous. There's no way that he left without feeding his kids. It's not possible. So the Gemara says that everyone agrees. Even Rav would say you can't go into you can't. That's extra. You already have food. You want me to go sell the Monet on the wall, right? That's too bad. You have food. So Shmuel, the reason why Shmuel was strict is because she also can't take too much from the estate. It's not right. It's not hers. She has a limit. She gets mazonos, $20 a day, whatever the limit is. So she got her $20 a day for the next 3 months. She's like, sell a property for me. That's Geneva. You're not allowed to do that. So Shmuel, that was Shmuel's broader concern. And the Gemara here also gives a limiting factor. If we know that while her husband was abroad, he died, there, even Shmuel would agree that she can liquidate some of the features of the estate in order to be fed. That's for sure. Where we don't know if he died. There, Rav Amar Poskin, Rav says she has to be fed because the husband has a shibud to her, he has to feed her. That's a ksuba. Shmuel Amar Ein Poskin. Why does Shmuel say Ein Poskin, that we don't give her food? My time up, Machlokas and the Amorai. Rosvid Amar Emad Sarare Atafsa. Maybe she grabbed onto food already, and we don't know that she didn't grab onto food. So Shmuel's default is, let's not be so quick to give her food from the estate. Let's first check and see what she took already. It's not just carte blanche. It's not like that. We have to be careful. This is other people's money. You're not allowed to do that. So Rav's default was give. Shmuel's default was, hey, we gotta see what's going on here. And Rizvid thought that was really irking Shmuel, and why he was strict is because there's every chance that she took something already from the house and cashed it in. The Rolex on the desk, great, I'm hungry. That's very easy for her. She lives there. That's easy. So that's what Shmuel was concerned about. And according to Rab, according to Rizvid, Rav Papa Amar Chayshin and Shema Amar Latzi Maisei Yadecha B'Mizonosecha. Oh, this is a beautiful svara. And here, this is, what's his name? Rav Papa was of the opinion that the husband might have said, I'm going out of town. I'm no longer taking your salary. Feed yourself. And if that's true, then for sure she can't take from the estate, because she's not giving her money to the estate. And that's how her mazonos are tethered to this cyclical partnership, the symbiotic, I'll give you my money, you feed me. But if the husband said before he left, I'm going out of town, keep your own salary while I'm gone, feed yourself. It's just easier. Fine, then come up with that deal. So we don't know what Shmuel was really concerned about, but the Gemara says, is it like Rav Zvid, who says that maybe she took properties herself, or is it like Rav Papa, that maybe the husband said, just keep your own proceeds for while I'm gone? My beinai, what's the difference between Rav Zvid and Rav Papa? We're not going to spend time on this because we don't have time, but these are the nafkaminas between the shitas of Rav Papa and Rav Zvid. The Gemara says, Tanan, we have a whole bunch of questions against Shmuel. Let's remember Shmuel's shita. That's the bottom line. Turning to the top of this page of Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph, what did we say? We had said that if a husband went out of town and the wife claims mizonos, Shmuel says, hey, wait, we have to see what's going on. He said, ain't poskin mizonos. So we're going to ask a host of questions on that. Our case. Chanan Amar Tishba Besof lo Tishba Betchila. Chanan was of the opinion that she has to make a shvua only at the end of the marriage. Besof lo Tishba Betchila, she doesn't have to make a shvua by taking mizonos. And Nechlaku Allah b'nei Kohanim Gedolim v'Amar Tishba Betchila Besof. When they saw the b'nei Kohanim Gedolim don't agree, and that she has to make a shvua even for food. The brisa continues. Ad kan lo pligi ela le'inyan shvua. Sorry, this isn't the brisa. This is an explanation of the brisa. Ad kan lo pligi ela le'inyan shvua. Seems like ABCs in the brisa that the only argument is around a shvua, but everyone agrees that you give. Kasha and Shmuel. Shmuel said in poskin, but here we say the only machlokas is about shvua. Everyone was giving her mizonos, Rabbi, whoever it was. So it's Kasha and Shmuel. The Gemara says Tirgam Shmuel b'shashama bo shemes. That case is talking about where we know that the husband died. And as we saw earlier on the page, when we know the husband dies, everyone agrees that there's no machlokas, and of course we're poskin mizonos. So that's how Shmuel gets out of this one. And halfway down, question number 2. What? That's a great, I thought about that question when that's great. I love that question. That's a good one. B'sheshamo. Who said that? Whose shita was that? Oh, that was the Gemara Svaram. That was Shmuel himself who said that. Yeah, look at line 2 on the page. Amar Shmuel modeli Abba for these 3 months. Lefisha ein adam maniach beso rekan. Shein poskin matam. It's a little hard to tell who actually authored that. We don't know if that's actually Shmuel or if it wasn't like the Savoraim at a later point kind of wove in a few words. It's very hard to tell. I actually believe it's not Shmuel. I think it's the Gemara, because typically speaking, when Amoraim spoke, they did not speak in Aramaic. Most of the statements of Amoraim throughout Shas are Hebrew. It's like a misnomer. We say the Gemara is always in Aramaic. The Gemara is not always in Aramaic. Just the banter is, but the actual shitas, if you look at Shmuel, ein posken. It's not less posken or something in Aramaic. It's not like that. So I don't know. That's a great question. Well, let's learn 2 more questions on Shmuel, and then we'll stop for the day. Tashma, we learned in a brisa. We saw this machlokas before, but this is a new brisa that we have to analyze. What does this brisa say? If the husband shows up and says, "Oh, I already gave her mizonos. You, Bezdin, shouldn't have given her anything." Ne'eman, the husband is believed and he gets repaid. But in order to get repaid, doesn't that mean somebody had to actually give out the property in the first place? And Akasha and Shmuel, because the only way to repay is if you take, which means that this Mishnah implies that the money was given out the second she said, I need money. Then the husband shows up out of the blue. What are you doing? I left you food. The Gemara says she has to return it. Haraya, Shmuel's wrong. That's a kasha on Shmuel. The Gemara says, "Hachanami b'sheshama b'boshemes." It's a fine ukimta. This is a very good way to get out of it. He died. Says the Gemara, he's not dead. The Gemara says, the case is that he's not dead. Says the Gemara, brilliant response, so quick. Yeah, he showed up. They're like, he's dead. Give me food. They gave him food. He's like, not dead. And he showed up afterwards. That's great. And then he's like, you thought I was dead. I don't know if you were trying to play me. I'm right here in the flesh. And you took double the food. You have to pay back. It's not right. I gave you food. Yeah, that's great. 1 more and then we'll stop. Tashma, 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more. Same case. Im, should be im, not beim. Yeah. Im. If a husband says to his wife, keep your own salary and feed yourself, he's allowed to do that. Kadmu bezdinu pasku. But if before that happened, Bezdin already gave out food to her, Masha pasku pasku, and yet again Akasha and Shmuel. Why? Because look what happened. Masha pasku pasku. They handed her food. They said, "Here, go take a piece of art off the wall. You're good to go." The Kasha and Shmuel. The Gemara says, "Hachanami b'sheshama b'shemes." In all of these cases, Shmuel has a way to learn in such a way that these cases are not compromising for him. Let's just review what we learned on this last Amud, which is a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel in regards to our readiness to forego the proceeds of the estate of the husband to feed a woman when he's out of town. Rav is trigger happy to feed. Shmuel is reticent to feed because it almost seems like he's more concerned about the mumminess issues, and Rav is not. Why that's the case, we need Rishonim, but that certainly seems to be the way the Gemara is presenting. On Shabbat, Yimir Hashem will pick up at Tashma, 2 lines before the wide lines on Kuv Zayin and Aleph. We'll learn Kuv Zayin and Beis and Daf Kuv Ches. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
That would be